When you're tired of all the choices out there and you don't know what to do, you can kick back and watch Tall Guy Eric Reviews.
Hey guys, Eric here today, and we have another review for you from what I guess I can only call the big three of the 42-inch OLED TV / monitors. Now this is the ASUS PG42UQ. I've been waiting a few weeks to be able to test this out and get the review out for you guys, and here it is. I'm just going to give you guys my overall thoughts, how I feel about it, and I'm going to compare it to the LG C2 and the Sony A90K, which is actually the TV that is to the right of the monitor that you see here in the video. Excuse the destroyed desk. This was the only way I could make this work. I have a very large desk, but being able to accommodate two 42-inch OLEDs is not the easiest thing in the world, especially without absolutely destroying your setup. So this is what I was able to make do, and it's working. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm gonna give you guys the pros, the cons, how I feel about this particular monitor, and which monitor I will end up keeping going forward to use as my personal gaming monitor. So just to kind of reiterate on the specs of the PG42UQ, it is a 42-inch OLED panel designed by ASUS. It uses the same panel as the newer model C2s and the A90K, so it is the Evo panel. Now, this is obviously a monitor as opposed to a TV, so you do get that monitor functionality that you would be used to if you're already using a monitor. So, like, when you turn your computer off, it turns the monitor off. When you turn it on, it turns it on. So that's super awesome. You get 4 HDMI ports, 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, 2 HDMI 2.0 ports. You have a built-in USB hub, so you can plug all your devices into it. You get a display port, which is a huge one for a lot of people, myself included. And then the most controversial thing that I'm going to talk about here in a second, and my thoughts on it, you do get an anti-glare coating. Other than that, you know, it's very similar. The panel is great looking. It has very minimal bezel. You can see that there is almost no bezel around the sides and the top. There's very minimal on the bottom, very similar to the C2. And then you have the little ROG logo housed beneath the panel. That is for the IR blaster for the remote, as you can see here. It's a very simple remote, but it gets the job done. It basically just has the functionality for setting the input, setting the settings and the monitor itself, and then that's kind of it, because this is not a smart monitor, so you do not have smart functionality, and that's okay. I don't think you need that on a monitor. Real quick, I am going to show you guys the overall OSD menu. So it's pretty basic. It's and actually you may have just noticed the brightness turning, like, going higher than it was. That is the built-in auto brightness limiter, and even though ASUS says you can turn it off, I will tell you it does not work as it's intended. It does work well, but even with all of the built-in functionality for the auto brightness turned off, it does still dim automatically, which is unfortunate. Apparently they're supposed to be fixing that in a software update. I guess time will tell. Excuse me. All right, so let me zoom in a little. Overall menu, you know, you've got your typical stuff. You've got your overclocking. This is a 138 hertz overclocked panel, so it is 18 hertz faster than the two TVs. I will say I was able to overclock this particular unit to 144 hertz. Your mileage may vary, because that will very likely vary from panel to panel. Some people may be able to get a higher overclock. Some people may be stuck with the 138. I personally was able to get it up to 144. I was not able to get it any higher, but it did work stably at 144, which is awesome. So yeah, we've got your typical settings, your G-Sync, all of this. You've got your brightness. You have uniform brightness, which is one of those things that is supposed to help with the auto dimming. However, when I turned it on, I only noticed that the image got dimmer, and it still continued to adjust the brightness automatically in certain situations. So I personally turned it off. You got your contrast. Now, the thing that I'm curious about is this vivid pixel. So something I have noticed about ASUS monitors is all of the newer ASUS monitors do not have sharpness settings. And from how it's described, it seems like vivid pixel is their answer to sharpness. So, you know, that's nice to have. It definitely has made things look really good, especially for console gaming. You've got your color options, and you have a pretty decent amount of color options. It's wild to me because your color temperature isn't set from like cool, warm. It's set by the actual luminance. So you can go all the way down to 4000K and all the way up to 10,000K. 4000 is going to be the warmest hue, and then the 10,000 is going to be the coolest hue. If you want the absolute brightest image you can get, you do have to set it to that 10,000, which is why I have it set in this video. You also have a user mode, and then again, just typical stuff. You've got your input selection, which there is a ton of. You have auto input detection, which is awesome. And then you just kind of have your other standard settings. So a few things to note of my experience with this monitor so far, just in terms of the OSD and how things work. I have had a few issues. Again, they do have a software update that's supposed to be launching in the near future. I believe it is version 31. I did read that on, I think it was TFT Central, because there were people complaining in the comment section that they were having some issues with this monitor with HDR, with that auto brightness limiter, and then some overall software issues. In terms of HDR, I haven't had many issues, but I have had issues with that auto brightness limiter. Let's put this back where it needs to be. That is not where it needs to be. Perfect. I have had issues with that auto brightness limiter. And I have had a few software quirks. The first one being 3 times now, I have set either certain settings on NVIDIA, whether it be my refresh rate, color settings, sharpness settings, and then they just reset themselves. I don't know what's causing that, but like I set it to 144 hertz and it went back down to 120. I set it to 138, it went back down to 120. I set my color temperature, it reset. I added a little bit of extra brightness, it reset. I don't know what's causing that. It is annoying. But other than that, it's worked great. I think the image quality is absolutely incredible. It definitely has that OLED image quality. But it does come with some caveats, and that is going to be kind of the biggest focus in this review. And it's going to be why I made the decision in terms of which monitor I'm keeping and would I recommend this monitor. So let's just go ahead and dive into that now. Actually, before I get into that, I do want to touch base on one thing, and it's going to be the big thing that a lot of people would love to see, and I'm just going to get straight into it. I'm going to show you guys how well this handles reflections. So as you can see, you can kind of see the outline of me moving my arms in the PG, which is over here on the left. You can kind of see that, but it is definitely distorted. It's doing a great job of blocking most of that light, blocking most of that image. And I'll be honest with you, in person, it's even better than it is on camera. In person, I can't see a thing. The anti-glare coating is phenomenal. It does its job well. It does definitely add some blurriness to the screen. It's not horrible. It's not the worst I've ever seen. It's not nearly as bad as like the G7 Odyssey Neo or the G8 Odyssey Neo. But it's not nearly as good as the LG was, in my opinion. I think it's kind of a middle balance. You know, it's kind of a trade-off. It's, do you want that perfect crispiness that you get with an OLED, those perfect colors, those perfect blacks, or do you want an anti-glare to where you can sit? Because like my room is very bright right now, and I mean, there is nothing on this monitor hardly. Like, it is just cutting off all those reflections. Now, if I turn to the Sony, you can see me perfectly. Again, on video, it is worse than it is in person. The Sony does a better job of cutting down reflections than the LG did, but even with that being said, I mean, it's a night and day difference. Like, just going in the middle here, you can see me perfectly on the right. You cannot see me hardly on the left. Like, it is a night and day difference, but that comes with some caveats, and let's get into them. So, okay. One of the biggest issues with this, and it's going to be a deciding factor for a lot of people who are wanting this monitor, because if you're going with the mindset of buying this monitor, you're going because you want an OLED monitor. You're not spending this kind of money. You're not going with a 42-inch monitor just to have an ASUS monitor. You're going because you want an OLED, and the technology right now is either you get a 42-inch or you get the 34-inch ultra-wide. There's really not a lot of other options. Well, when you go with OLED, you're going with OLED because you want those perfect blacks and you want those vibrant colors. The vibrant colors are there. Even in a bright room, it still looks good. Does it look as good as like the C2 or the Sony? No. No, it doesn't. I'll be honest with you. It's still very crisp looking, very clear, but when there's a lot of lights on, that anti-glare coating does its job, but it definitely takes a hit in the contrast department. The first thing I noticed whenever I booted this TV up and started playing games, because I had my lights on, I was doing some testing, blacks looked gray. That is not always the situation. Last night, I was playing some games. I was in a pitch black environment, and those blacks were black. Like, they're perfect. But when lights, especially ambient light, kind of gets into the room and it starts making its way towards that anti-glare coating, that is the first thing that takes a hit, is the blacks. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because had this monitor not have had an anti-glare coating, I think it would be an absolute knock out of the park, not even a question. Like, for me personally, the monitor was like $1,500 after tax. If it didn't have that anti-glare coating, I would probably be keeping it. But with that said, as it stands, I'm going to do some more in-depth testing because I still have some time to return it. But as it stands, this will not be my monitor going forward. It does have some software issues, which sucks, but I personally cannot pay $1,500 for an OLED monitor that kind of breaks away from what makes OLED. That when there's a certain amount of light in the room, those blacks turn gray and the color loses its vibrancy. And then the last thing that I do want to touch on is my personal experience with HDR gaming. When I play in HDR, I do so on console because I think it's a much better experience than it is on PC. I did try it on PC, but in general, I'll do it on console. And the HDR works great, and it is very bright, but it is extremely limited. I don't have the means of showing you guys because the HDR setting is locked. I think I still have my Xbox plugged into this monitor, and if that's the case, I'll show you what options you have, but you're very limited when it comes to HDR settings on this monitor, whereas like with the C2 and the Sony, you can go in and you can change everything. Like, you can change the sharpness, you can change the color, you can change everything. And I'll just show you with Ori, because Ori is an HDR game. With this monitor, once it switches to HDR, and Ori actually looks incredible in HDR, even with the limited selection. But when you go into HDR, you can see it says ASUS. Well, you probably can't see it very well, but zoom in a little. You can see it says ASUS HDR Gaming, and that's one of the, I think it's either 3 or 4 modes that you have total. But you can see everything is grayed out. Uniform brightness is okay, but you can't change contrast. You can't set that vivid pixel. You can't change your color space. You can't change saturation. You can't change any of this. All you can change is brightness, your HDR setting. So you have ASUS Gaming HDR, ASUS Cinema HDR, which between the two of them, there's not a whole lot of a difference. You have console HDR, which I think looks horrible. I'm not sure what the function of that's supposed to be. And then you have the ability to adjust your brightness if you don't want it on 100 all the time in HDR. You can choose 2 color temperatures, 6500K, which is the middle ground. It's kind of the norm for monitors, and then 10,000K, which is, again, going to give you that coolest look, but also the brightest. But that's it. You cannot adjust anything else. So with everything I've said, I just kind of wanted to give my thoughts and where this monitor stands compared to like the C2, the Sony. I do not think that this monitor is worth $1,500. It's $1,400 before tax, and then after tax, depending on what state you live in, like I live in a state with almost 10% tax, it's over $1,500. Right now, the LG C2 42-inch is on sale for $1,150, and you can get it open box for as low as like $1,000. That's a $500 difference if you get it open box, and that's a $350 difference. It's a no-brainer. The C2 is just a better TV. Like, no, it's not a monitor, but if you have a graphics card that's capable of HDMI 2.1, you're not really losing anything. If anything, you're gaining. I had a lot of expectations going in with this monitor, and in terms of image quality and, oh my gosh, in terms of response, like this monitor is so fast. It's so responsive. It's incredible. But that anti-glare coating and the lack of options killed it for me. If you mix that with the software issues, for me, this is not going to be my monitor going forward. With that said, though, still an incredible monitor. And I would like to know which monitor you guys decided to go with in the comment section. For me, for now, I'm sticking with my A90K. I love it. It's beautiful. But yeah, I just wanted to give you guys my thoughts and impressions on the ASUS monitor. I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you so much for watching.
When you're tired of all the choices out there